Awesome. We are live, Cédric. Welcome back to another session.
Woohoo!
It's already your third one in like the third month. That's a good hit rate.
Yeah, time flies. Time flies.
Absolutely. So, we last spoke about, a good month ago. So quickly tell us a bit what happened over the past weeks. What were you working on? What did you do over the past weeks?
Yeah, I actually thought about that before going live here. And out of the past, I think it's been 5 weeks maybe since we last spoke. And I think 4 of those weeks I was doing Air Force service, which for those who are watching and are not Swiss citizens is still something that's mandatory in Switzerland for most males. I'm an officer in the Air Force. Unfortunately, I'm not flying planes. I'm doing other things in my unit.
That would be cool.
Yeah, that's still a goal. But I already have a pretty cool job in the intelligence services, so it's actually kind of fun. But then also, it takes a lot of time, is what I realized. And on one hand, it was good that I was able to get Claude, my coworker at Tomahawk, assigned to the same unit. So we actually spent a lot of time in the military together, and we were able to advance some Tomahawk things. But of course, that took a lot of time. What it forced us to do is to automate a lot of things. So the last 5 weeks, I actually spent a ton of time thinking about processes in Tomahawk. So what happens when someone applies for funding or someone gets introduced to us, and how can we make as many steps as possible automated so that, for one, we create an efficient process, a reliable process, and then also a process that is kind of replicable and doesn't offer too many ways to fail due to human error. So that's probably the one thing where we made quite a step forward. And the other thing that we invested in is transparency. So I've created quite a bit of content, mostly videos that I've shared on YouTube and Facebook and LinkedIn, answering questions that founders had or friends had about what is it that a venture capitalist does. Because I believe in more transparency helps everyone. It helps founders get funding quicker. It helps me understand what is on the mind of someone that I'm talking to. And overall, that's something that we want to make a big push in is create more content about what happens behind the scenes of an investor.
Right. And what's actually the rationale behind that? I mean, to a certain degree, that will also help you to establish a strong brand and then hopefully attract better investment cases, right?
I think that's a secondary factor, but in a first step, I just think it's the right thing to do. I think it shouldn't be that you have to go trial and error yourself every step of the process. I think
True.
It should be better documented. There should be more information out there on how to efficiently structure your process with investors, because ultimately, if the less time you have to invest into building a relationship with investors, the more time you can invest into building a world-changing product, and that's ultimately what I'm excited about.
Awesome. So we also had some questions that were coming in before we actually went live. So for everybody listening and watching right now, if you do have any questions that you want to ask Cédric, please post them in the comments so we can actually include them in today's episode. And one question that actually was quite interesting, I thought, is would you quit your job to start a business or rather start part-time and then probably building it up step by step? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think it's a tough question. I assume this comes from someone in the position that has an idea and is thinking of how much do I risk in order to make that idea a reality. Mm-hmm. At what point do I just say I leave my job and I go full-time on this? And I think it's hard to answer in a general context. I think overall what I'm observing is that here in Europe, we tend to be too safety oriented, meaning we'd rather let a big opportunity go than giving up on a safety net, mm-hmm. Which can sometimes keep us from making it big and creating these like really big companies that require us to take a lot of risk. But then also the opposite, just leaving your job just to pursue any idea probably isn't the right thing either. One thing that could work well for you is if your idea has some sort of service model attached to it, to leave your traditional job, go full-time in your startup, but still have a certain source of income. To give you an example, like Frontify, when they first started the business, Roger, who's the founder, he used to have a day job, then he reduced that to, I think, 20% or 40%. Then he went full-time in Frontify, but he didn't merely focus on just the SaaS revenue to survive, so to say, but he also had companies pay for features they wanted him to add to the product. And that's a great way for him to finance the next 6 months, the next 12 months. And I think that's the ideal way, because it allows you to be fully focused on your idea while not running out of cash within just a few months and then potentially having to go back into a corporate role.
Got it. I think you also touched the important topic of risk appetite. There's obviously a big difference between Swiss or European startups in general compared to the US. Is there any tip from your side, how we can really unlock that appetite to go after the big things and also not sell ourselves too short, too small, and really also have these big ambitions to build a huge successful company?
Well, one quote that I always remember is, we're probably going to regret the things that we haven't done more than the things that we have done. Now, that's not to say we should be stupid and take huge risks and potentially ruin our future by just seeking out risks. But I think we can be calculated with risks, set like a time budget for when a certain idea or a certain project needs to become self-sustainable. And if things work out, then great. If they don't work out, we'll have a backup plan. But I think what I personally also sometimes underestimate is how valuable focus is. So being in a startup fully invested with all my time and all my energy is just so much more valuable than being 50% there or even 80% there and having a 20% job on the side. I think you need to be full-time at pretty quickly at some point in your early startup journey in order to give it your all. Also, from an investor's perspective, I would not invest in someone that has a backup plan, right? I want someone that is so fascinated with a problem that they are willing to go all in and give it their all in order to make it happen.
Yeah. I remember we once did an interview with Daniel Gutenberg, and his take was also very similar to that one. And he said, the most rational thing to do if you are building the next unicorn, at least from your perspective, is to really invest everything, all the time, all the money, whatever you have into that company, because it will eventually give you the best return, the highest return ever.
One story that comes to my mind is my friend Flavio in New York, who's building a company in the medical healthcare space. And he had previously built companies and sold some of them and done fairly well. And then for his last round, he had to, for his lead investor to come in, he had to reach a certain amount in the round. I don't remember how much it was. But for him, it basically, he ended up selling everything that he had, like all the public equities he had, everything under his name he had to sell. And it was kind of a tough call. Like I think the deadline was like a Friday evening, and I think it took him till Friday morning to liquidate everything so that personally he could invest whatever the difference was that was missing between that trigger amount and what investors had committed. And so he's an example that I often think of when it comes to these questions of like going all in, risking everything that he has built so far, because he so believes in the idea that he's working on.
Yeah, that's crazy. I really admire if you can take that decision, but I also know that, at least from the outside, it seems a really, really difficult decision to make. Although if you're actually in there, it might be not that difficult because you have this strong belief and you think, hey, this is going to end well for sure.
I might not be the best person to give you advice on this, right? Because I've always, and that's the dilemma of my past 18 years, like I was always involved in different projects at the same time. That's why I think I make a good investor, because from my personality, I just like to be involved with multiple things at the same time. Mm-hmm. For a very long time, I kind of battled that inner self that told me whenever I was getting close to being focused on just one thing, there was another idea that popped up, and I had to spend time on it because I found it so interesting. Mm-hmm. I just have this like really curious mind that's hard to satisfy with just one concurrent thing. And so for me, I've always had multiple projects that I was working on, even though there was big bets that I took and that I'm still taking even now with Tomahawk. But up until the point of starting Tomahawk, I've always had several projects that were partly occupying my mind. So I might not be the best example, but I observe what it does with people and how it creates this extra boost of energy if you're fully invested. And I think it's extremely powerful in order to become successful as an entrepreneur.
Right. For you, focusing at different projects at the same time, and I know that also some people, they need that to get energy, to have, the different things to do and being involved in different projects at the same time. You've seen both parts of the setup. Now you're fully committed and fully focusing on Tomahawk.VC. But is there a setup that you prefer, or do you also think that this really depends on the stage in your life that you're at and so on and so forth?
Well, I think my journey was right. My journey was, so far, was a lot of fun, and I've learned a lot along the way, which I wouldn't have if I had focused on just one or two ideas along the way. Mm-hmm. Nevertheless, for me, I had to figure out what it is that I'm best at and where I can really have an impact. And I think being an investor is a great role for me, because even though I'm focusing on one thing and I'm wearing just one hat now, I don't have different interests. My sole interest now is making Tomahawk successful. Mm-hmm. In my daily life, I still work with a lot of different projects, be it companies that we're looking at, or companies that we have already invested in, or companies we're looking to divest at some point. There's just so many overlapping, interesting journeys that I feel no 2 days are ever the same, and I think that's what's giving a lot of energy to me. Got it.
So let's also focus on another question that was handed in over Instagram before this stream started. I think it's also a pretty interesting topic. There are different takes on whether you should start part-time or full-time. There might also be different takes at your education background. So one question is a university degree still necessary in today's networked and fast-moving world?
So it'd be interesting to understand a bit better who asked this question, and if they're asking it as a founder, as someone that wants to go work in a startup. Either case, I don't think it's necessary. I think there's many great ways for you to acquire knowledge and experiences, and university is just one path. Nevertheless, I really enjoyed going to university, even if I already had my first company running, and so it was a lot of work and very little sleep for a few years. Mm-hmm. But there's two things that I really enjoyed. One was, and I studied electrical engineering at ETH, and the main skill that I took away was how to learn hard things by myself, or difficult things. How do I get an understanding of very difficult topics without anyone breaking them down for me? Because most of it was self-study. I think that's number one. And then number two, I met a lot of very interesting and curious minds when I was studying. And that was just very stimulating for me. So I would definitely go back. I've also, over the years, 2-3 years, I thought about potentially going back to university, or at least taking some courses. In the end, I think there's better ways to get the content now. I can just watch podcasts or read about it by myself. Mm-hmm. But the community feeling of being there with other students and acquiring knowledge together, solving tough problems together, and also being at the edge of what's currently possible, I just find extremely stimulating. And so maybe one day there will be an opportunity to go back and spend a bit more time just receiving knowledge.
Right. What would you study if you were to go back to university today?
I mean, my first thought would probably be something in the computer science space. Mm-hmm. But I'm also extremely interested in psychology and philosophy. So I'll probably be a mix of classes, and because I would go there not for a degree, but I would go there for just to satisfy my curious mind. It would probably be an assortment of different courses that I would kind of dabble in and then see where I want to take this.
Sure, makes sense. There is, I'm sure you know him, but maybe some people haven't heard about him yet. There's a famous angel philosopher, he calls himself, or he was called. I'm talking about Naval, the founder of AngelList. And I recently just discovered that he has a lot of really great content out there, really about life, about how to build a company, about investing also. And he put out a whole tweet storm on Twitter. And I would like to highlight some of those things and also try to discuss with you what that actually means for Switzerland, because obviously he's writing that with a US bias, if you want it or not. But I would like to see if some of his recommendations and advice also can be applied to Switzerland. So the first thing that he mentioned, one of the things was seek wealth, not money or status. And he defined wealth as an earning potential while you actually sleep. So you don't actually need to be physically there. What do you think about that in terms of adaptation to the Swiss market?
I think in principle it's very applicable, right? And for me, the way I would phrase wealth would be freedom. Freedom to spend your time on what you really like and what you have a passion for. And there's this whole FIRE movement, financial independence, retire early. I know we're both readers of Mr. Money Mustache. But what's his? No, not Mr.
Mustache Post.
Mustache Post, yes.
The Swiss version.
Yeah, which is fascinating, right? I think it's a fascinating topic to not just work until you're 65 and then retire because the system says that's how long you have to work and then you can finally retire, but to much earlier in your life take control of your financial future and build the processes and systems that allow you to be more and more in control of your time, even if you're starting from zero when you start to work. The Mustachian Post, a guy from the western part of Switzerland, he writes about his journey, his goals, and the way he thinks about setting those goals and why. And I think it's fascinating. I have to admit that I'm not, just because I want to stay focused on venture. Mm-hmm. I don't invest in public equities right now. I don't, except for my pension. And third pillar, I like to have my mind in one single place and try to become world-class in it. Mm-hmm. But I think all the thoughts that he describes and the systems that he describes very much resonate with me. So maybe sooner or later I'll find time to sit down and build a system where I can work along those lines as well.
Absolutely. In a country like Switzerland where you don't really openly talk about money, having the goal to retire early, in his case with 40 years old, might seem really offending to some people. Like, what are you talking about? This is not the way that you're supposed to live whatsoever. This is not normal. This is very arrogant. What do you think about these reactions that can trigger?
Well, as someone that probably thrives on triggering reactions where people think you're a bit crazy or at least different, I'm probably the wrong person to discuss this with, because I think in the end, like as with everything else in life, you have to, I think for all the important things in your life, you have to be able to break them down to, I would call them like atomic units, meaning you have to be able to go from like very high level thoughts, like I want to retire at age 40, mm-hmm. and all the way down to like, what does it mean for my behavior this year, next year, today, tomorrow, and all of that. How do you connect all these high level thoughts with everything that is very actionable in the moment? And that's a process that I really enjoy and that has led me to a lot of insights over the past few years when it comes to like how much stuff do you actually need to own, and do you need to stay in one place? Do you need to live in one place in order to be productive and successful as an entrepreneur, or can you be that and still be traveling and appreciate all the additional insights and experiences that gives you? So overall, I'd say I don't care much about what other people think. At least I like to not consciously. I think subconsciously we all do to some degree, but at least consciously, I think it's fun to sometimes question the status quo and the way it's always been done. And I think the way he's doing that is a great way. And of course, by sharing his numbers so openly, by being so open about his processes and systems that he uses, he gets a lot of readers, he gets a lot of eyeballs, which I think is great to share these ideas with more people.
Got it. Also, one thing that Naval put in his tweets is that from his perspective, everybody can become wealthy. Do you think that is an over-exaggeration, or is that even possible?
I mean, again, if we look at his way of saying wealthy as being in charge of your own time, then I would definitely agree, because it's not just how much you can accumulate in terms of financial assets and means. It's also how many financial assets and means you need to live a free and happy life, right? So it's a lot about like how you design your life and what your values and priorities are. So in that sense, I would definitely say, yes, you are the maker of your life. You are the maker of your own destiny and happiness. And so I definitely think we should all spend time on this question and think about like, what is it that I really want out of life? Instead of just accumulating resources, so that later on in life, we think we can sit down and think about how we now can distribute those resources.
Right. And what is it that you really want to get out of life?
Yeah, I'm really happy when I can just satisfy this endless curiosity that my mind has. So if I, as long as I keep learning things every single day and accumulating experiences every single day, I think I'm always going to be happy. Luckily, everyone in my immediate family is healthy. Also during COVID, no one was really affected. So for me, I think it's that, like just being exposed to interesting people that I get to spend time with me and share their experiences with me, people that are critical of my worldviews and that allow me to be critical of their worldviews. That's just the stuff that I thrive on, and hopefully I'll get to do that for the rest of my life.
Nice. And I also think that this puts the money part in a good perspective, right? So money is just a means to an end to a certain degree. And I don't know the exact words how Naval ended his tweet storm, but it was something along the lines of, and then when you eventually get rich or wealthy or whatsoever, you discover that this is not what you actually expected in the first place. And I think that's a wonderful way to end that tweet storm.
One thing that I would add, and one thing that I've recently learned about myself is that I think money is a means to an end in the sense that I learn from the projects and companies that fail more than I do from the ones that succeed. But the ones that succeed, they kind of finance my school of life in the sense that I can fail at other projects now. And of course, it's great to accumulate resources over time to build a certain security net. But as I said, like money doesn't really help me learn more in a single day or meet more interesting people to some degree, right? So, so I think that the lifestyle design and thinking about how to maximize for that is much more important to me than the actual dollar amount.
This is a very interesting statement. So basically, you need the failures to learn and to also fulfill your curiosity and need to learn new things, but they don't actually pay the bills. So that's interesting.
Yeah, the successes pay the bill. I mean, of course, you learn a lot along the way of building something successful as well, but
sure.
I just feel that the things that have impacted me the most and have kind of made me the person that I am were the tough times, the times where I left a company, where a company failed, where it didn't take off, where a funding round didn't happen in the end. Those were kind of the more impactful teachers to me than things that went right and felt easy in the aftermath.
Right. Maybe in that regard, also question, where do you actually, or how do you actually decide on what you spend your time on and on what not specifically?
So there's a lot of work that comes my way where I just react to it, be it a founder reaching out, like a portfolio founder reaching out to discuss an idea, or a candidate, or getting inputs on a strategy decision. And I could spend all my day just reacting to others' requests, talking to others. And what I've realized a few years ago is that if I only do that, it's never super fulfilling, because I don't feel I can make big progress on the things that really matter. And so what I do now is I split my day in half. In the mornings, I typically take time for myself to work proactively on the topics that I think I want to make, on the initiatives where I want to make progress on. And then in the afternoons, I work reactively, where I take calls, meetings, and I react to whatever is thrown my way.
How easy is it to follow that rhythm?
I think for the most part, I'm doing pretty well. There's always exceptions where if a company is in a bad position or even in a really good position but needs immediate attention, I break the rule, but then I also sometimes have full days that I can take off. So I try to balance it out, and at least for the last few months, I feel I've been pretty good with it. Not traveling between time zones has also really helped.
Right.
Because that's what usually messes it up. If I'm in the US, then my afternoon calls become my morning calls, and then it's easy to be stuck on those ideas, on the reactive thoughts, and I usually have a hard time getting into the proactive parts. But for the last few months, I've been good, so fingers crossed.
Awesome. So I just saw that we got a first question from the audience here. Also, if you do have anything else that you want to ask, please post it in the comments so we can tackle it. So here, Sofian asked, I'm going to read it out loud because it's a longer one. Despite doing a lot of sports and eating healthy, I don't have a lot of energy and feel fatigue all the time. Do you have an idea how to be more energetic, or also especially when you want to work a lot?
Right.
Do you have personal recommendations on that part?
Well, we have experienced that before, where on the surface, it seemed like the whole setup was fine, and yet I was not feeling it. I had a hard time getting out of bed, or I had a tough time getting stuff done, or working on the bigger initiatives. I would always kind of procrastinate and just do smaller tasks first. And of course, it only became harder to get started on the important things. So in my experience, a few things have led to that. For the most part, it's been because I was pushing something emotional, or at least some sort of people problem ahead of me, and that's usually what blocked me, either with myself or with someone in the company or someone that I worked with. And for me, even though it was not hard, usually I built up this tension over time, and it became harder and harder for me to be productive and efficient. And once I actually faced the problem, either by speaking with myself, by just writing down what my thoughts were, or approaching the problem with the person that was involved, it released tension. Or if I felt I was not ready for that, by sharing it with someone that I trusted, and just basically giving them a rundown of what's happening in my head and what's keeping me from being more productive. A great way for me to do that was always in EO, Entrepreneurs Organization, which is this organization of entrepreneurs where you have a forum that meets monthly in a confidential way. That was always a good place for me to share and get experience shares from others.
Awesome. So I marked that here is answered. And another question, in the first live stream that we did, you also revealed that you will be a father soon. I think it's fantastic. And I also wonder, in what way has that affected or changed, your decisions or your perspectives on investments, but also on life in general? Have you already noticed any effect there?
So I'll try to tackle these step by step. So I think it's becoming more and more real, right? Now I can feel our little daughter kick when I have my hand on Elena's belly, and it's a super exciting journey. But obviously the big change in our lives will come when she's here, when she's with us, right, and she takes over our lives. So in that sense, it hasn't really changed my daily routines or the way I approach my work yet. It has definitely put a few more things on my mental roadmap for what I think about, among them education, right? How do you raise a kid? What is the things that I want her to learn from me, from us, and what worldview do I want to show her? So those are some bigger questions, and they don't have to be immediately answered, but it's just something that's really sparked my curiosity, and I started to dig into projects and look at initiatives. When it comes to how I invest, nothing much has changed. I think mostly due to the fact that we have a very long-term thesis. The way I invest is focused on the next 10, 15, or maybe even 20 years. Mm-hmm. So it's not something that's affected by like a daily change of heart. Overall, I don't think that has had an impact on the immediate on my immediate mindset on how I approach investing in startups.
Mm-hmm. Maybe in what way, having this long time frame that you look at investments, what role do big changes like the climate change, for example, play in that regard? Is that something that you also consider when you invest, or how do you judge that? So it also has a direct effect on the life of your daughter, eventually, right?
Yeah. So it hasn't affected the way I make investments yet, because I think it's also important to stick to a thesis and see how it plays out. One thing that I've done last year, even before I knew I was becoming a dad, is I started to finally compensate my CO2 output. Right, that's one thing. I have a friend that's working on a reforestation project in Colombia, I think, right now, which I'm always there as a sparring partner if he needs any inputs. But we haven't changed Tomahawk or my investments into like an impact investment vehicle, just because I think I would also not be the right person to do that right now. I'm very curious, and I'm trying to learn from people in my vicinity that are working on impact investments. But it's not at the point where I would feel comfortable making impact investments, because I think it's a different ballgame. I've spent the last 15, almost 20 years working on SaaS and fintechs, and I think that's where I have to apply my expertise as an investor for the time being.
Absolutely, yeah. Otherwise, you would not start from scratch, but you probably go a couple of fields back and to have to learn something new again. And what you built over the past years is compounding to a certain degree that helps you to make the good decisions.
And that's not to say, I think climate change has become such a big and important topic that it has impacts in all our companies, right? Compensating their carbon dioxide output and just generally thinking about how to leave the world a better place, I think is something that a lot of us think about, whether we're building a fintech or we're working on that reforestation project. So it definitely has an impact. And then one way how I think Tomahawk can and will have an impact is we believe in a distributed world where people do not commute as much. They don't go into offices, they work from their homes, or they use existing infrastructure. Mm-hmm. More room for all of us. There's less wasted electricity and wasted infrastructure. So in that sense, I think we're contributing to that, but it's not like that has changed since my daughter is, or like since I know I'm going to become a dad at the end of this year. I think that's what my worldview has been for the past 12 years or more.
Absolutely. In that regard, Naval also had an interesting content in his podcast where he said from his perspective and experience, building a company is hard no matter how big of a company you try to build. So if you are running a company that is, a couple of restaurants, Italian restaurants in town, it might actually be, you might work the same hours or even more than somebody trying to build the next unicorn, was his thesis. So how do you actually find and also define the right scope of problem that you should tackle with your company? Should it just go for the bigger, the better, or is there any sweet spot that is a better fit for you?
Well, at least personally, I don't think bigger is better is what would be my theme if I'm choosing what to work on. I personally like to work on stuff or projects that I think can become sustainable, meaning they can kind of succeed me even if I'm not here anymore, or if I'm not in the company anymore, they can still provide value to hopefully lots and lots of people.
Right.
So I tend to gravitate towards projects that have a high degree of automation, that are software based, or at least to some degree independent from me as a person, and then a lot of the workforce. That's just my value system. Is I'd like to create something that can become sustainable and can succeed me. Other than that, I think it's important for everyone to figure out what is kind of at the intersection or the overlap between where they think they can have an impact and what they want to work on, and then also what can be sustainable for them.
Absolutely. There's the next question coming in from Sofian. How do you actually find a mentor in Switzerland? Do you have any tips on that one?
Well, first of all, thanks for the question, Sofian. This is fun, getting them as we speak. I think it all depends on who you think should be your mentor and why. Speaking about myself, I am somewhat reluctant to say, yes, I can become your mentor if that's what you approach me with, to just ask me if I can be your mentor. But if you approach me with, hey, I'm in this spot and I want to get to this place, and I think you could really help me because you've built, or you have this and that expertise that would be extremely valuable to me, you will never hear me say no, even if my days are already full. I will definitely be there and share my experiences with you. So I think it's all about figuring out who is the right person to help you and how, and making that as concrete as possible, being respectful of their time and approaching them with a very concrete idea of where you can need their help and input. So that'd be my way of approaching it, is thinking about like who is the right person to help me with this step, and then potentially afterwards is someone completely different.
Some people might also ask, like, how do you answer the question, what's in for them? So what can you, looking for a mentorship, bring to a potential mentor?
I think it's good to think about that, but then I personally don't put that much value or weight on it, because I don't want this to be a trade. Like, for me, it's totally fine if what I'm getting out of this is just to see you succeed. And life is long enough that I'm sure our paths will cross again, and there's always ways for all of us to help each other. So for me, it's not about that sales pitch. You don't need to send me an email where you tell me, oh, I can do this for free for you. That's not what I'm looking for. But you are right, completely right. Like, other people might be looking for that, and it might be a great way to convince them or get their attention.
So great question. Thank you, Sophia. If you do have any other questions, post them in the comments right now, because we are tackling some rapid fire questions for Cédric right now. There are a few that we prepared. So the first one is, just to get you warmed up a bit for the rapid fire questions. What are your top gadgets under $100 purchase price?
Yeah, there's one that's laying on my desk right now. It's this thing here. Yeah. It's white, so that's a big minus. I couldn't get it in black, but it's a Hyperchoose charger. And what I like about it is it basically has all the ports that I need. So most of my devices now run on USB-C. And before, I would have to carry my MacBook charger and my iPhone charger separately. Now I can charge, even like Elena, if we're traveling together, this is good enough to charge both our laptops and a few phones at the same time.
Wow.
So this has allowed me to go from like 3 or 4 devices, if you count for both of us, to just one. The only thing, like, it comes with these adapters. By default, it has a US plug. And I think that was $69. I bought that on Kickstarter or Indiegogo at the beginning of the year for $69. It finally shipped last month. There was quite a delay due to COVID. But yeah, that would be my most recent gadget. I don't have a ton of gadgets anymore. I sold or gave away most of my... I don't have a drone anymore. I don't have a lot of... Yeah, it's basically my AirPods, my laptop, my iPhone, my camera, that's it.
Yeah, the basics. What else do you need, right? And you also don't have that much space with 64 items, so you need to choose wisely. What have you recently learned? Is there anything in particular that, really stuck out?
I just read, maybe, I'm not sure this counts as learned, but it's the first thing that came to mind, which is I want to invest time into reading good, well-researched articles more. I really like the website Wired. So over the last few weeks, I've picked up more and more of their articles and either reread them or read them for the first time. I really enjoyed them, and there was one that I read about Elon Musk and the way he got started with Tesla and the bets that he took on them early on. And that's one thing that I really liked. Oh, and this also came up because with the Tomahawk team on Friday, we have our team call. It's the three of us, Bojan, Claude, and me. And a few weeks ago, Claude started to prepare some venture capital trivia for every Friday.
Nice.
So at the end of each call, he has a few questions prepared, usually around a certain topic. And recently it was about who led the seed round of Tesla, how big was it, and so on and so forth. And Elon Musk was not the founder of Tesla. He was their seed investor. I think he invested about $6.5 million out of a $7 million round at their seed. And he only later became the CEO. I think first he acted as executive chairman. So yeah, the beginnings of Tesla, let's put it this way. I learned about the beginnings of Tesla and the history.
I like that. Now the next one is interesting. I'm curious what we're going to answer about that one. What's a surprising fact that people don't know about you? And if I already know it, you have to choose a different one, okay?
Well, I don't know if you could guess, but one thing that I'm really good at is falling asleep at any time and in any place. It's something that I've learned when I was building MediaSign, my first company, and studying at the same time. And I learned how to go on very little sleep for a long time. So my body became used to just falling asleep like this. I can take 5-minute naps sometimes. And then it was also something that was super helpful when I was going through the initial officers training in the Air Force. Because sometimes we would go on missions, and there's a saying in the Air Force, like, you run to wait, meaning like sometimes there's like high energy and you got to run and everything, and then suddenly there's like a 2-hour block where you can't do anything. So I was very efficient at using those breaks in between to catch up on sleep.
Great.
I'm not sure, was that something that you already knew or guessed, or? I don't know.
Not really. I'm not sure if I heard it in one of your videos once, but it didn't like ring a bell. So we let that count. Is that actually a good thing? You know, if you are able to fall asleep that quickly, that might also be a sign that you are heavily sleep deprived, right?
Well, I think nowadays, and I'd say for the past 2 years or so, I've had a much healthier relationship to how much sleep that I need. Before that, I would say I was often sleep deprived. Now I do get my 7+ hours whenever I can, and I really enjoy sleeping in on the weekends. Whereas earlier, I just felt like sleep was a waste of time, and there's so much more interesting stuff that I could do with my time. But I feel in the past couple of years, I've been on a pretty healthy journey. That's probably going to be disrupted once my daughter is born. At least I come well prepared.
That's right. Already been there, done that, right?
Yeah.
So next one is, if you had only 3 words available to describe yourself, what 3 words would you choose?
So one thing that I used to have on my Instagram, maybe it's still there, is entrepreneur, essentialist, explorer. And I think those 3 nouns, they do a pretty good job at like describing different sides of me. So entrepreneur, creating stuff is definitely a big part of my personality. Essentialist, like being very focused on what I feel is important. And then explorer, as in like that's just my curiosity for everything in the world, and also the relationships in my life, like going deeper, going further, taking it to the next step, being very vulnerable, putting myself in situations where I can grow. So yeah, I would probably go with those 3.
Why is investor not one of them?
Well, because I think investor, well, it doesn't start with an E, so it didn't rhyme. No, but I think investor just sounds too passive to be something that I will put there. Even now, I think of myself as an entrepreneur. I try to rethink how venture capitalists work and think, and try to be transparent. I try to make the life of entrepreneurs easier. So I still see myself as an entrepreneur, even though my functional role right now is probably best described as investor.
Yeah, makes sense. And, thinking back about all the years of experience that you already have, or also just the life advice that was given to you, what was the best piece of advice that you have ever received, and why is it the best piece of advice?
That's a tough one. So I'm also going to go with my first thought, even though it's hard for me to exactly say when I've received it, but I think somewhere around the age of like 21, 22, when I think was when I made the transition from being a son to becoming more of a friend to my parents. And this happened in parallel to a pretty bad breakup that I had when I was younger. And I think just being vulnerable and letting emotions happen is something that I tried to, until that point, was something that felt more like a weakness to me. And now I can appreciate it a lot more because my emotions do a lot more for me than my brain does very often, especially when it comes to complex topics. I think all of the complex decisions in my life I ultimately make with my gut or my heart, and not with my brain, because it's just not capable of capturing all the complexities of a really interesting problem or decision. So maybe it's not someone that said something, but definitely that my parents allowed me to be very vulnerable, and at the same time, someone that they saw at eye level was something that really helped me become a better person and become a more mature person.
Nice. I like that one. That's a nice one. So also talking about emotions, there are things that annoy people and then get them frustrated. So what's something that really annoys you?
So my first thought that comes to mind is when things that can be automated are done manually. And maybe that's very specific to, and maybe that tells you a bit about how I think, but I don't like the thought of something going wrong or being missed or not being done exactly, because we didn't take the time to automate it. And also because I think in my value system, I think we want to use the human brain constantly to solve new problems and not to just stupidly reapply checklist or apply the same process over and over again. So that's definitely something that I can get frustrated with if I feel that we have not really advanced in the automated stuff. So luckily the last 5 weeks, I was pretty happy because we made big steps forward. I'd say the couple of months before that, we didn't do that. We were waiting too long to make decisions on certain tools that we were going to use. Okay. And that's something that does agitate me and make me frustrated.
Yeah. Makes sense. Yeah, I like this spirit and this strive for efficiency. I think that's an important trait of an entrepreneur in general.
And I think it's what we have to do, right? Because we want to stay a very small company. We never want to outgrow a team of, let's say, 5 to 10 people. And so the only way to scale ourselves is if we are very, very focused on only doing those things manually, where we really need our individual expertise and gut feeling. Everything else we streamline.
Yeah, makes sense. So there are more questions coming in. Again, from Sofian. Do you have any tips on starting a startup during a recession or even a deep depression?
Do I have any tips for that? I mean, I think we spoke about this in a recent chat between the two of us. I think it's one of the best times to start, right? Because you are suddenly there's new problems that pop up that come with this big economic shift. And then also it's the best time to find co-founders because unfortunately lots of people usually lose their job during an economic downturn. So it's a great value proposition for you to be out there and say, hey, I have this big vision for a big problem that I want to solve. Hopefully it's also going to change our economic situation. So it's easy to get people excited. It's easier to get people excited. Also, their alternatives are not as hard to beat as they are during a boom phase when everyone has well-paid jobs at great companies and with tons of perks.
Yeah.
But maybe that's not the advice that Sofian is looking for. But I'd say just be be opportunistic and look at the bright side of life. Look at what you can take away from this that's positive and make sure to leverage that. Right.
I could really add here the sentence that Alain, the founder of Swisspreneur, always gives us when we talk about ideas is really to answer the question, why is now the right timing? He always uses his surfing analogy and says, being an entrepreneur is like being a good surfer. There are waves coming. You need to get the right wave at the right time. And I think that's so crucial also here. What's happening right now, every crisis pushes something more forward, but also makes other things less important. And this can be really your good timing for catching the right wave in that sort. So think about the why is now the right timing question. And if you have a good answer for that, go for it and go
and if you need some motivation, also go back in time and look at what companies were started in 08, 09, and 2010. And you'll see that some of the biggest, best known companies were started right around that time. I think Airbnb emerged from the last crisis. Twilio, Stripe, I think, was founded around that time. So lots of very exciting concepts have emerged from crisis.
Absolutely. So I'm curious to see what we will look back to for this time period now.
And on that topic, I mean, it'd be interesting to hear your insights as well. But from my point of view, the real economy hasn't seen as big of an impact as if you had asked me 3 months ago, I would have said we're in a much darker place by now. But from where I stand, at least, which is probably not a very well-informed viewpoint when it comes to public markets. But I think for the most part, the central banks have been printing money. They've provided stimuli packages. And so I don't even think the crisis has really gotten to its low point yet. But it'd be interesting to hear your insights.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the stock market, it's crazy. You would expect that everything goes south. What happens is the right opposite, right? Or at least it's very volatile, but with a clear upwards trend. And this is really combined with a big question mark. And I'm not sure where we will end. I'm far away from making any predictions because I just don't know. But it's a really, really strange and also, unaware situation to a certain degree where we will go. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure if we are already past the crisis and that thanks to the money printing and sort of the we do whatever it takes statement of the central banks, that they can actually really lower the effect of the crisis, or if we are just, we have an open tab and one day will be a big payday and it will haunt us back. Yeah.
One thing that worries me, I'm not so worried about Switzerland and the most parts in Europe, even though there might be smaller spikes right now, but I just don't understand. In the US, I think that it's still going up. There's so many new cases every single day. And yet people are picking up travel again. It worries me a bit what's happening in the US.
Yeah. What do you think? Where will that end? Where will that lead us?
I mean, I just think we haven't seen the end of this yet. I think there's more to come. There's more that's going to happen, and hopefully it won't be bad. But I just think right now we're kind of just pushing problems ahead of us, or at least the way I perceive it from my perspective is that we haven't gotten to the real issues yet. We're kind of covering them, and we're trying to be happy, even though there's definitely some facts that look very grim right now.
Yeah. So I have one last question for you. But there I'm super interested in what you say. What deal made you the most money so far, and how much have you earned by that deal?
Yeah, that's a tough one to answer. I mean, I think a lot about transparency, and I believe that you should be as transparent as you can without hurting other people, without creating a downside for others. And unfortunately, this is a topic where, even though I would like to share a lot more, very often you put agreements in place that say you cannot talk about the price at which X, Y, or Z project sold, or where trade sale happened, or so on and so forth. I think what I can say is that obviously being excited about crypto early on provided great gains in terms of relative gains, meaning like I think the way Bitcoin and Ether and some other currencies have appreciated over time was definitely phenomenal, although I was a very small investor at the time. So in absolute terms, that's not what has made me the most money, but it's probably provided me the biggest return on investment. And then also for everything else, I'd say there's some exits that I've been lucky to be part of, but also pretty much all that money has been reinvested. And in the end, I'm playing a very long-term game. I am fully invested in the projects that I believe in. And so even if I had some cash in the bank in the past, right now I have most of my assets invested in startups and exciting ideas and founders.
Right. Yeah. Then that's a long-term game that you're playing, and we are curious to be, and also excited to be part of that and see where you will end up.
Yeah, it'd be fun to do these talks every now and then, and maybe that could be one way of giving you and everyone that's watching an insight into that journey. Because as I said, like I believe transparency helps all of us. It's just that there are certain boundaries that unfortunately I didn't define, and therefore I cannot just freely speak about everything.
Sure. Yeah, it would be cool, but we know that there are like lawyers and legal contracts that sometimes make that a bit more difficult.
Maybe further down the road, I mean, I'm starting to think more and more about how we can. There's one idea that we're discussing in the Tomahawk team, which is to really make an effort to become the most transparent VC, at least in Europe. Mm-hmm. And we haven't really committed to the idea yet, but we're definitely experimenting with what it could mean and what the upsides and downsides of that are. Nice. And so also if you or anyone that's watching right now have some insights or ideas or are pro and can leave some comments on what they would really like to see or hear about or learn about, then definitely leave those comments, and we'll consider all of them as we go along and experiment with these ideas.
Awesome. I think that's a great call to action to end today's conversation. Thank you again for taking the time, Cédric. It's really always a pleasure to talk to you, and all the best, and see you next month, I guess, or in 2 months, who knows, after the summer break.
Of course, yeah. Thank you, and thanks for taking the time for this, and we'll talk soon.
Take care, everyone. Thank you for watching.